Now that we've had a couple of days to process the Vikings' early postseason exit, let's talk about it. I'm Tatum Everett alongside Gabe Henderson. We also have ESPN's Kevin Seifert in studio for us today. And we just listened to General Manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and head coach Kevin O'Connell's season-ending presser. So, Kevin, first question out of the gate for you. What was the biggest takeaway from today?
Yeah, and I think the question everybody's wondering is, are there going to be any changes to the coaching staff, specifically defense, specifically at Donatel? And Kevin O'Connell said that he's still working through that, still going through what he said would be a week-long process of evaluating everything, everybody, all players and coaches, and didn't sound like there would be a resolution before then. It's notable that he didn't say, yes, he's coming back, but he also didn't say, no, he's not. So the process is ongoing, and I think that's people can take that for what they want, but that was the big takeaway for me.
When you talk about these processes, how long do you think it normally takes?
At least a week. I still think this loss to the New York Giants still kind of feels kind of new. So you want to make sure you don't make a decision that's too emotional. So the objective way to go about it is wait until the end of the week until you make that ultimate decision. But just understanding that, I feel like the eyes and the mindset, the thought process for Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, that's starting to change, right? When the press conference, was January 18th, 2023, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said, hey, almost a year ago, I was just getting hired here as the Minnesota Vikings general manager. So I love how the thought process has started to change from, competitive rebuild last year to now championship mindset. And I really like, that kind of talk and that mantra because, getting to the playoffs now is kind of expected. Would you agree?
After you go 13-4 and win your division and make the playoffs, no matter how it happened, I think anything less than that's a disappointment. And so they would like the arrow to continue going straight up for sure, I would think.
What do you make of Kevin O'Connell talking about how their defense statistically wasn't where they wanted to be at and how he went through the process of changing it through the season, but obviously it didn't really shore up there towards the end?
Yeah, there was a real flashpoint after the Detroit game, the game in Detroit where they gave up, I think that was like the fifth straight game, they gave up 400-plus yards. And he said, everything's on the table at this point. We're going to consider everything other than totally changing out the scheme, which you can't do during the season. And so I felt like that was sort of the flashpoint where that process started. And they did make some changes. If you watched closely and looked at the numbers, they did do a little bit more man coverage, a little bit different in terms of how they blitzed and how they did their pass rush and how they used their personnel. But ultimately, the outcomes were not that much different. And so I think that's, they definitely tried, I think. They made an effort and it showed up in the numbers, but it did not show up in the outcome and the results. And so that, maybe that shows them that there's more significant things that need to happen than what they were able to do during the course of the season.
Yeah, Gabe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just believe that, just to your point of, this 3-4 defense, right? We ran a 3-4 defense 28 to 30% of the time this year where, a 3-4 was going to be our primary look. The fact that we started to change that as the season went on, it started to make you believe that, okay, well, we do need to be a little bit more urgent in making some of these changes. And you can't, reinvent the wheel in the middle of the season, but there was a game that stood out to me, that New York Jets game. At home, I believe we blitzed, 45% of that game. And I was like, oh, wow, this is what our defense can be. But, things started to revert back to, the things that we were accustomed to. And I'm sure the defense side of the ball is the number one objective. I know Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi weren't going to say that, but that's the number one objective this offseason for this Minnesota Vikings defense. Minnesota Vikings team. What does that look like? We don't know.
Well, what we do know is that the offense was really exciting to watch this season, led by Kirk Cousins, who statistically didn't have his best season, but his best record here as a Viking. Moving forward, we heard them say today they expect Kirk Cousins back as the quarterback for the Vikings. Was that something that surprised you a little bit, Kevin, or how did you feel when they kind of came out and just said it?
Yeah, a year ago at this time, you might have been saying that's going to be a really important question at the end of the year. But based on how things went and the way he played, I call it the weirdest season he's ever had. His QBR, which is kind of an overarching viewpoint of the whole quarterback play, was maybe his worst of his career in Minnesota. But Kevin O'Connell trusted him. He threw more passes than he's ever thrown before. He was allowed to work through more interceptions than he's ever thrown before, and he had more fourth quarter comebacks than he's ever had before. And so you couldn't separate one without the other, and you couldn't say that them winning 11 close games and 13 total was not very much directly related to the way he played. And so I came out of the season not thinking it was any, it would have to have been a very surprising performance for him to not be the unquestioned starter going into next year in terms of who they would be keeping. The contract is guaranteed, so they'd be paying a lot of money to not have him be their starter, and so it would have had to have been a really bad situation for it not to happen. But the real question to me, as he gets older, he'll be 35 next year. He'll be entering the last year of his deal. Do they just let him play under the last year of his deal? Do they sign him to another extension that locks him in further than that? These are the questions that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah gets to answer internally and eventually externally. But I think that's really, the thing that has to be talked about with Kirk, not so much whether he's going to be the starter next year, but how much further than that.
Yeah, well, Kevin O'Connell said today, day one of this offseason training, which will be April 17th of this year, he expects Kirk Cousins to be leading the charge. And that didn't really surprise me, just understanding that and understanding that this is going to be year two in this scheme. And Kevin O'Connell did say the fact that Kirk Cousins is going through year two of this scheme, we will have another opportunity to grow. The learning process is going to be a lot shorter. The growing process is going to be a lot larger. So when you have an offense that had the success that they had this year, you want to continue to make leaps and strides to be better. I really think this offense gets better. I mean, the top 15 offense, I think it shrinks down to top 8, top 7. This is going to be the highlight of our team this year is our offense, and having Kirk Cousins as the quarterback who already knows it, who already understands how Kevin O'Connell thinks, that makes this team better from the jump.
And a huge part of that offense is obviously Justin Jefferson with a record-breaking third season in the NFL. They said today, and I actually loved this because Kwesi's such a pop culture reference kind of guy. We heard him drop the NERD, Pharrell Williams, Chad Hugo reference. But today he called having a challenge like JJ's contract a champagne problem. I mean, I don't know if he's a Taylor Swift fan or just a pop culture fan. But, I mean, it's true. And I thought it was interesting to hear him say, we have already started those conversations with Justin Jefferson's team. What are the odds we see a deal happening now as opposed to maybe down the line?
I think it serves the Vikings' interest very well to get it done now. I mean, unless you think he's going to be less of a player next year or 2 years from now, and no one thinks that. So the prices only goes up. And so they'll have high level of motivation to try to get something done. A lot of teams that have an offensive skill player of his caliber try to pair them with a quarterback that's a rookie under a rookie contract. That's not an option here. And we just talked about Kirk going forward, so they'll have to do some creative planning to say how you can have a quarterback salary and also a receiver making what's going to be close to a quarterback salary too. But again, that's the champagne problem. That's as I was Googling during the press conference trying to follow all these references that he made as an old man myself. But it's only going to get more expensive for them. I would imagine they'll try very hard, and it'll just be up to whether they hit the number that Justin's group wants.
Yeah. I mean, may all your pain be champagne. Like that's pretty much the reference right now that I got from Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. JJ, the best receiver in the NFL. Like how do you not pay him? How is he not on this roster? That answer was probably the shortest answer Kwesi gave our audience today, because there's really no question when it comes to will JJ be on this team? Absolutely. Our offense is going to run through Justin Jefferson. Kevin O'Connell, Kirk Cousins, they're going to make sure he makes plays and makes plays for years to come. So get that champagne ready, whether that's Brut. That's all I know. I'm not even going to try to name all the different.
I was actually like, wow, Gabe, quite the champagne connoisseur over here.
Prefer wine. Prefer wine, but that's for another day.
Well, before the show gets off the rails, let's talk about the NFL draft a little bit, because I know that there are 4 picks and a potential compensatory pick coming from the TJ Hawkinson trade in the mix. And you kind of heard Kwesi Adofo-Mensah talking about the strategy. What do you, and obviously, like, we are so early in this game, but heading into the draft, knowing his style, I guess you could say, for a year, what do you expect from these guys heading into this draft?
I expect at the end of the draft, wherever they picked will be look nothing like what the lineup was going into the draft. Because last year they made a ton of deals. He used those picks to move up, move down, acquired not only Hockenson, but the Jalen Reagor trade, the Ross Blacklock trade, all with draft picks. And so as we sit here and talk about 4, maybe a 5th through the compensatory, I have a feeling that that number will be very different one way or the other, at least position-wise, round-wise, by the end of that. I think if his first draft is any indication, I think he felt very comfortable moving around, trusting the evaluations of his personnel team and, zeroing in on specific players that he wants. Maybe he'll break from that this year, I don't know, but if history, the 1 year of history we have on his approach to the draft rings true, I think there'll be a lot of movement between now and the end of the draft.
He also mentioned that a lot of the younger guys, like his first draft class, they're still young. They may not have gotten as much experience. So even if this draft class isn't as big as the first one that he's had, he still has a lot of faith in those guys. What did you see from that first draft class, I guess you could say, Gabe?
I think experience, even if that's special teams experience, that plays a lot. As long as you're on an NFL field, you understand the speed of the game, you understand the pace of the game. And guys that understand that a lot better now is Brian Asamoah, who played remarkable minutes on the defensive side of the ball the last few games. But he was our special teams, in my opinion, he was our special teams demon, always around the ball. But also you look at a Caleb Evans who got a lot of run this year. Andrew Booth Jr., if he gets back, has a full offseason to recover, a full healthy offseason with, I would like to call them the best trainers in the NFL with Tyler Williams and Uriah. They're going to be making plays at a much higher level in year 2. The biggest jump in the player's career is from year 1 to year 2, and I'm expecting that to happen. And then when you add players in the draft, I expect us just to be a very fast football team. Speed was a word that Kevin O'Connell used this year because the way the game is changing, there's so much space. You have to have more space than the other team if you want to be successful. So if you have guys, running 4.2s, 4.3s down the field, that opens up opportunities for, the Justin Jeffersons of the world to be able to make more plays in space. So I'm expecting the year 1 guys to make more of a contribution and then us to get a lot faster in the draft.
It's a little crazy that we are talking about the draft and we just had the season wrap up, but it is now talking season officially. And we thank ESPN's Kevin Seifert for joining us today. You can always check out his work on ESPN.com. You're leaving Gabe hanging over there.
Oh, sorry, man.
I almost
I didn't want to be rude.
No, you're good.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. But if you do need some more Vikings content, the Vikings Entertainment Network, we will be back doing these newsers. We'll be back with our podcast. We have a lot of fun content coming your way despite this season being wrapped up. As we all know, the NFL is a 24/7 game. And so we'll kick things off for now. I'm Tatum Everett, Gabe Henderson, Kevin Seifert. Thanks for watching.